Okay, let's start by introducing each of our task force members. I'm going to call on them individually, ask them to tell us a little bit about themselves, their business, and give you their sort of top ideas today for you and for the industry. And we're going to start with Misty Alexandre. Misty?
Good morning, everybody. So yeah, as mentioned, Misty Alexandre. I'm a partner with Robertson Stromberg, and I focus primarily on construction law and commercial debt recovery. I have been getting lots of calls, as I'm sure everybody who is an expert here has been. Primarily the issues that I'm seeing are construction companies that are concerned about delays or potential for delays on their project and what they need to do to start taking steps to protect themselves now. I'm also getting calls about projects being suspended. So what to do if you are on the receiving end of a notice saying that your project is being suspended by the owner for one reason or another. So I will be speaking a little bit later in the program, but the main focus of my talk today is going to be getting to know your contract and what your rights are and what you need to do now, even if you have not yet experienced any delay type of issues on the construction site.
Perfect. Thank you, Misty. Let's hear from Candice next. Candice?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Candice Grant. I'm also a partner at Robertson Stromberg, and my focus is on employment law. So not surprisingly, we've been hearing from many of our clients in terms of concerns about how to deal with their employees, what to do if someone's sick or potentially exposed, and beyond that, how to deal with the downturns that we're seeing in their business. And so that'll be the primary focus of my comments, are how to manage your workforce, in particular in the light of a number of the legislative changes we've seen over the last 2 weeks.
Perfect. Thank you, Candice. Rodelle? Oh, Rodelle?
Sorry,
there we go.
I was muted. Rodelle Genoway with Untapped Potential Business Consulting. I'm an independent consultant, and I focus on HR consulting, strategic planning, lean consulting, and leadership training and development. But today my expertise on HR is what I'll be talking about. So similar to Candice on workforce situations, lots of questions on layoffs. What do you do if someone's sick? Can we legally ask them to stay home? That sort of thing. And then just balancing that communication all together. So Candice and I will be kind of on the same page.
Perfect. Thanks, Rodelle. Kyle?
Thanks, Mark. Good morning, everybody. My name is Kyle Anderson. I'm with Bridges Health based out of Saskatoon, and we have an office in Regina as well. And we assist organizations with different health and wellness strategies in the areas of injury prevention, recovery, HR consulting. But the main focus we'll be focusing on today is the mental health side of things. I know individuals are certainly going to be struggling with stress and anxiety, uncertainty regarding what's going on right now. And we offer a number of different mental health related strategies to make sure people are taking care of themselves right now.
Thanks, Kyle. Brita?
Hi, everyone. I'm Brita Lind. I'm the CEO of Arcas Advertising, a Regina-based communications, marketing, and strategy firm. And really, my advice to everyone, 3 takeaways: be prompt, be honest, and something called bluff, which is bottom line up front. So if communications wise, if things are happening, it's better to get things out imperfectly, of course, talking with lawyers and HR consultants, than to leave things and get them perfect, because in a vacuum, people will make things up, and whatever they make up, I guarantee you will not like. Be honest about what things are going on, because people know when people are being real or not right now, and that's going to be critical to your clients and your workforce. Bluff, bottom line up front. When you're communicating, put the most immediate thing up front. When people are under stress, they're in fear, and so that affects people's memory and their focus. So these big long emails that you're getting about COVID-19, I'm not reading past the first paragraph, and I don't think most people are. So that's the 3 biggest pieces of advice that I have right off the top on communications.
Perfect. Thank you, Brita. Mike, Sali?
Good morning, everybody. Mike Sali from Aon. We're risk management for insurance and surety, strictly for construction companies. 2 of the main things we'll probably be focusing on, and we've been focusing on quite a bit over the last 10 days with our clients, are the terms of the contract and how risk allocation is going to affect contractors, as well as your surety facilities and how you're going to preserve your credit worthiness through the next 60 to 90 days. Thanks.
Thanks, Mike. John Spooner.
Yeah, hi everyone. Is this audio coming through okay?
Yep.
Okay, great. Yeah, just to add to Mike there, Mike and I are colleagues. I'm in the Saskatoon office. Mike is in Regina. And some of the questions that we've received initially, of course, is in and around general insurance. Does my insurance, whether it be builder's risk, whether it be liability, does it provide any protection? Is there going to be any recovery from that? And so we can just touch on that, as well as the surety aspects and the contract review that Mike was mentioning.
Perfect. Thank you, John. Thomas.
There we go. So my name is Thomas Archer. I'm the VP of Operations at the Saskatchewan Safety Association, which probably most of you know is the Health and Safety Association for the construction industry in Saskatchewan. Probably the two main sort of areas that we've been getting a lot of questions on since this all went down and started is probably a little bit in terms of the risk management side, in terms of on site. So questions around, is there a control plan, or how do you manage a pandemic on a construction site? What are the procedures, that type of thing. So we are working on those, and actually I'll reference them later. That probably later today we'll have most of those resources up on our website for companies, construction companies. The question we've been getting a little bit too is probably in regard to a little bit of business continuity and around our core. So we have companies that might have come up for audit that are worried about their certification in terms of bidding and the future of that. So just want to let everyone know on the call that we have put in plans to extend everyone's audits and to make sure that we are managing that. People will get letters of good standing and that sort of thing in order to continue with their business in relation to our core program. So those are kind of the questions that we've been fielding lately. And we'll probably talk a little bit more about those too.
Perfect. Thank you, Thomas. And last but not least, Craig.
So Craig Kutarna Gates with MNP. I'm a partner on the consulting side, based here in Regina, but we provide support and services to businesses around Saskatchewan. Certainly the key areas that we're seeing and hearing about opportunities is how do you plan for what is a very dynamic environment right now? But key items are project utilization and forecasting, labor needs and requirements relative to cash flow. Cash flow management is a key piece as well too. Cash is always king in business, and this is definitely a trying time. And then credit planning as well too. The opportunity to be proactive and demonstrate to your banks and other credit granting facilities that you're on top of your credit planning and that you have proactive plans in place is a positive step to take.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Craig. So that is our list of task force members. We're very lucky to have them providing advice and guidance to construction companies in this time. We're going to dive right into questions. Again, a reminder that although we have a bunch of prepped questions that you sent in, thank you for that. You can ask questions through the Q&A feature of Zoom, and all of this will be recorded. We're going to go through questions in themes. So the first series of themes are going to be based on the questions we're hearing most commonly. So I'm going to ask Rodelle and Candice to jump in on these. Rodelle, we'll start maybe with you for this first one. First, could you give a quick overview of the new rules around layoff notice? And then can you tell us what happens if a company provided layoff notices prior to the waiving of notice requirements and what that may mean for them today?
All right, thanks, Mark. So yeah, there have been some changes around the layoff process. So the government is now allowing you to, instead of providing layoff notice like you typically would for a work shortage, that notice period is being waived. It's maybe a little unclear, and Candice might be able to jump in as well. I think if you did happen to provide layoff notice prior to March 20th, you still would be obliged to keep up with that notice. Any notice provided after March 20th would be waived, and the person would go on layoff immediately.
Okay, thanks, Rodelle. Candice, anything that you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, maybe just a bit of further explanation. I think Rodelle's got it correct there. What we've seen here is a flurry of legislative changes over the last week as far as employment matters go. And the latest change is this amendment to the employment standards regulations that waives the notice requirements for layoff where we have a public health emergency. But what's interesting is the amendment for that legislation doesn't contain any reference to it being retroactive. And of course, when we saw the new changes to the Employment Act that brought in the public health emergency leave, those were expressly retroactive to March 6th. So based on our best interpretation at this point, it doesn't look like those are retroactive, at least at this point. So any employers who gave notice last week may want to consult directly with legal counsel. Their options might depend on exactly what they told the employees last week.
Okay, thank you, Candice. Okay, next question. There's been a growing number of records of employment that need to be filed. Companies are looking for advice on how to expedite completion while meeting the minimum requirements. Is there any advice or guidance on this? For instance, one question that was specifically asked is, do we need to submit comments in comment boxes? And so, Rodelle, first, any advice or thoughts on that? And then Candice.
Yeah, so there is a list of codes, and we can share this in writing after too for everyone to see. But if an employee is absent due to illness, quarantine, or ordered self-isolation, it would be code D on the ROE. And it's been, we've researched a bit that CRA has requested no comments. They'd rather, I think they're going to be getting a lot of ROEs that they'll be going through. So as that code is really what they're going to be looking for. So no comments is best.
Okay, thanks, Rodelle. Candice, anything to add to that?
No, nothing to add.
Okay. Next question is with respect to vacation pay. So this came from somebody on the call. Does vacation pay need to be paid out to staff if they're being laid off? Candice, maybe we'll start with you first and then Rodelle.
Sure. So at this point, vacation pay does not need to be paid out to the staff that are being laid off. The requirement to pay out vacation pay comes when employment ends. And at this point, we're talking temporary layoffs under those new provisions in the Employment Standards Act. It is clear that those don't bring the employment to an end. The caveat to that would be those new amendments say you can lay off for 12 weeks in a 16-week period. And so if you go over that, it may be that you're triggering a termination at that point and vacation pay would have to be paid out.
Okay. Thank you, Candice. Rodelle, I'm going to ask you this next question, and then maybe if you have something to add to the vacation pay, you can do that first. So the new question is, if I'm laying people off, but I need to call them back, or I have certain days of work where they can come back, how does that work? And how does that work in terms of not messing things up for them or for us as employers? And do we have the ability to bring people back and then send them back on layoffs? And yeah, can you just outline the rules for how that works?
Yep, sure. Firstly, just to add to Candice's comment on vacation, if vacation dollars and time have been earned already, technically those dollars are the employees. They're just sitting in the employer's bank account. So the employee could request a payout. And I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of employees start doing that if they have a lot of vacation dollars banked up. So that is a liability on the employer's side that they would have to pay out that vacation pay that has been earned by the employee.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
To your question, Mark, about the whole EI process. So yes, in short, employees can still kind of work and still be on EI, that sort of thing. It's called working while on claim. There's a link that I can send as well for people to read on it as well, because the CRA they have a few good examples laying out some situations. So basically you'd keep receiving 50 cents of every dollar of your benefits up to 90%. Anything worked, you'd have to note on your every 2 weeks when on EI, you have to submit like am I working, yes or no, and report your earnings. So that's what the employee would have to be doing. But otherwise, it is in the best interest. I think the whole point of EI is to help transition that person get back to work. So EI would be in support of that person working on and off EI. So there's a system in place for that.
Perfect, thank you. Candice, anything you want to add to that?
No, just make sure you're communicating clearly with your employees and doing what you can to support them. And other than that, I fully agree with Rodelle's comments on that issue.
Okay, thank you. Candice, we'll start with you on this one. Can we, as an employer, send someone home without pay if they are sick or someone in their house is sick?
Sure. So we kind of, when Rodelle and I were preparing for this, we sort of broke this down into two categories. So the first one is if the person is sick. And the clear answer on that is yes. If someone is sick, whether it's with COVID-like symptoms or anything else that makes them unfit to be at work, you can and should ask them to stay home. Unless they are otherwise entitled to a paid sick leave through a company policy or an employment contract, a collective agreement, something like that, a sick leave is unpaid. And the employer should generally offer whatever assistance they can to help the employee access benefits that might be available to them at this time. On the second issue, if someone in their house is sick, this is one that would have to be assessed case by case. So theoretically, if as an employer, if you believe someone in the employee's household has been exposed to COVID or is suffering from COVID, the employer could issue a directive to self-isolate, which would be under those new public health emergency leave provisions. If a doctor issues a different opinion, if they say, no, that person's fine to come to work, the clarification that we got in the regulations just last week is that the doctor's opinion would prevail, which is not surprising. As employers, we're not health experts, but this is an unprecedented time. And so I think that's why we're seeing that ability to say, as an employer, I'm making a directive that you self-isolate. But that's, again, going to have to be assessed on a case-by-case basis. If we're talking about other circumstances where there's no real expectation or reason to believe that this person might be suffering from COVID, it would be treated typically like any other illness, which is going to limit your ability as an employer to ask that person to stay away.
Perfect. Thank you, Candice. Rodelle?
Nothing to add.
Okay. So this will be the, yeah, we got one more question for this section, and then I think we'll shift gears for a little bit and give Candice and Rodelle a bit of a break. Rodelle, we'll start with you on this one. With workers over 65 or 70 years of age still in our workforce, how do we manage this vis-a-vis employment laws and safety requirements right now?
Well, I think with the amendments to the layoff notice period, that's still just regarding temporary layoff. So there really aren't any issues there when it comes to age. The real issue that comes up is if that layoff becomes permanent, then that's a termination of employment, and there'd be some common law compensation possibly, which could end up being quite large. Candice, I'm sure you have something to add though as well.
Yeah, further to Rodelle's point, I mean, if we are talking about people who are not going to be recalled or ultimately are not recalled after the 12 weeks, then there could be some pretty considerable exposure from a common law perspective. I suspect maybe the question also is aimed at that occupational health and safety piece. What should we be doing to protect our older workers? And that's going to depend on the nature of your job, the nature of that position. And so, it's again, a very specific analysis that's going to have to be undertaken by each employer. I suspect we're getting to the point where if an older employee were saying, I don't feel comfortable doing this work, that it might be appropriate to offer that person a layoff so that they do have that opportunity to self-isolate.
Perfect. You know what, I'm going to ask one more question and then we'll move. So this is just one that just came in through the Q&A, and since it's specifically tied to this topic, we may as well deal with it now. So if an employee requests a temporary layoff notice, so if they request it because they feel unsafe at work because of the chance of getting COVID-19, can they then access EI during this requested layoff period? So if they ask for it, are they still available to get EI? And maybe Candice, since your mic is live, I'll go to you first.
Sure. As far as we're aware, as long as the employer agrees to that layoff, there would be no issue with employment insurance entitlement. Ultimately, you're not obliged to give the person the layoff they've requested. And if they really feel unsafe being in the workplace, there's an occupational health and safety process to go through to analyze that concern. What we're seeing is a lot of uncertainty around that issue. We don't know whether it would be reasonable at this point to refuse work on the basis that it is unsafe. And again, it'll depend on the nature of the work. It'll depend on the provisions and the measures the employer has taken to make sure their employees are safe. But given the unprecedented nature of this time, what we have seen in a few circumstances are employees who just aren't comfortable coming to work for one reason or the other, and employers choosing to allow that person to accept a layoff so that everybody can kind of do what's best for them in these times.
Okay, thanks, Candice. Rodelle, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Not really, just when it comes to communication, again, being open and trying to do what's best for your employee. I think how leaders handle all of this is going to make a huge impact on the culture of the organization when things get back to normal, when that day comes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Rodelle. Thank you, Candice, for your answers. In the next phase, we're going to hear from Brita and from Thomas. And so we'll start with this first question for you, Brita. In times like this, what do we need to be focused on in terms of our communications and engagement? You talked about that a little bit with your 3 steps, but would you like to elaborate a little bit in terms of how companies should be communicating right now?
Absolutely. Thanks, Mark. It's a great question. The 3 things, other than being prompt, honest, and bottom line up front, the other thing is meet people where they are. If your people use text, and that's the best way to communicate with them, then use text. If they prefer email, then do that. I'm also recommending to a lot of clients short videos. Right? That is something that will keep people's attention. Keep it under a minute. You can do it on your phone. Just make sure that the phone's stable, so it's not all shaky, because that adds to stress and fear. And when it's the phone is set, then it just is you look a lot more confident, if that makes sense. They will appreciate the effort from a leader. Think about the best leaders you know and the ones that inspired you. Those are the ones who communicate really well. So I'm a big fan of Abraham Lincoln. He was a master communicator. So think those ways. Secondly, remember that you will come out of this. So think about how your actions now will impact your reputation later. So people remember how you conducted yourself as a leader. How do you want to be remembered? And the point Rodelle made about culture is so on point. So really think about those ways. If you're feeling afraid, sometimes it's best to maybe set that aside and park it and show that confidence, but share that fear maybe with someone that you trust, that you make sure that you take care of your own mental health. I also really encourage people to use keywords and themes. It's something that you can keep repeating over and over again. For example, in our company, our themes are communication and connection, because we're all working virtually. We want to make sure that everyone's taking care of themselves and that they're feeling connected to the team and they're communicating properly, so things keep rolling more smoothly. So maybe in your company, it could be themes like, stay connected. It could be safety's in your hands, or it could be whatever, we're all in this together. I think that's one that the SCA has been using, things like that. Another thing I would recommend is a lot of people are starting off their preambles with, wow, these are really crazy times and we've never seen things like that. Write out all your stuff and then take that stuff out. We all know that this is an unprecedented time, but all that does is actually kind of probably bring up people's stress. So get right to the point, be confident and clear and short. So in summary, meet people where they are, use keywords or a theme. How do you want to be remembered for how you conducted yourself here? And stay away from fearful words and phrases. Thanks, Mark.
Brita. I'm going to call an audible here, and I'm actually going to go to you, Kyle, because Brita brought up mental health a couple of times, and wondering if you can talk about mental health and communications and the importance of messaging and how we do that appropriately.
Absolutely. You know what? I'd probably just like to echo everything that Brita said. I think she touched on a number of really great points there. That idea of fear messaging, right? We want to try and stay away from that as much as possible. We know these are extreme times. We know there's uncertainty and angst surrounding all the things that are going on right now. And it's just, at the end of the day, really important that we stay educated and aware of what's going on, getting our news and our updates from viable sources, as opposed to just, social media and things that are posted on Facebook and Twitter and all these different sources, right? So we want to, of course, stay updated. We want to make sure we are just kind of communicating in a healthy way. I like the idea of, at the end of the day, we're all human, right? We're all going to be experiencing this stress and uncertainty. Being able to verbalize that with individuals, right? We're all going through similar feelings, and being able to relate to one another and really validate that experience is really important.
Perfect. Thank you, Kyle. And we'll come back to you in another couple of questions to give us some more insights there. Thomas, I'm going to come to you next, first on this question, please. So this is specific to, from one of the audience members, what advice should we be giving to workers who are concerned about safety while working out of town and staying in hotels? Sure.
So, well, I'll sort of echo a little bit of what's been said too, just in terms of, because I think there's a few things to focus on, and there's sort of that immediate perceived threat of itself. And there are things, again, in health and safety, what you want to do is you want to eliminate or control a risk, right? And there's different ways you can probably do that. So on a large site, or probably any site, really have a lot of different tradespeople coming in and out. You have a lot of people. So a lot of it you got to manage. Let's just say from the top end, you got to manage what you're going to do in terms of the immediate threat, and that's that sort of how do we mitigate and how do we practice social distancing. We have, like I said earlier, we'll release a bunch of this stuff actually probably in the next few hours in terms of how you can do that on site, signage, to remind people to social distance, how to wash. Hygiene is very important. Self-assessment tools, there's quite a few out there. Again, we've got some on our website that point to the government of Saskatchewan self-assessment tools. So practicing all the things you need to do in terms of, so that's at a very high level. Probably what we're seeing as we get sort of more down into the granular is actually managing not just the threat and thought and the perceived crisis in terms of the virus in itself and how it contracts and that sort of thing, but actually the mental health piece actually up more and more as this thing progresses further. So making sure, and I'll echo exactly what Kyle and Brita said too, is making sure that, if you can eliminate, I'm not necessarily eliminate, or curtail any non-essential work at your workplace, if you can do a lot of remote working, that'll help, limit exposure. If you can, again, practice that social distancing. But in regards to that, we've been getting a lot of calls, not just from our own staff, but other staff too, just kind of questioning, how do we deal with that? Working at home in self-isolation is not necessarily all that fun. I've done it myself in the past too, and with small children, and it's a challenge. And I think the biggest piece, and they've already iterated this, is the communication piece. So making sure that we're communicating often and positively, and that's going to, in the long run, show that you care as a company, you care about people's health and safety. But it's not just the virus and that mental health around that, but it's also financial stability. So a lot of calls we've been fielding too, and we talked a little bit about this already in the first section, is, what do we do with layoffs? How do we manage that people? But there is actually a huge stress that's surrounded this in terms of, will I get my full wage? Maybe I can't afford to live on only 50% of my insured earnings, and is there top-up programs, those kind of things. And those, from a health and safety perspective, we don't necessarily are the experts. But in terms of how do we work with people, I would probably suggest that, if you look at your business practices and you look at it from that health and safety perspective and say, can we eliminate or control those risks? So if people are traveling together, yes, you can look at self-assessment tools and try to do the best, and you can those risks in terms of those individuals, and they determine their own risk as well. But if you can eliminate people traveling together, staying in hotels together, that would of course be the best practice at this point in time until we know more. So, in terms of general site, same thing on sites, do your risk assessment, ask the questions to people as they come onto site. Have you been in contact? Should you be self-isolating? If you have to deem it as an employer, you can go that route. But again, at the very minimum, hygiene is extremely important. Make sure that you know, as they say throughout this whole thing, is make sure you're washing your hands. If you have to self-isolate, do that. But for on sites, hygiene in regards to yourself, your PPE that you're using, and as well as making sure we're practicing that social distancing. So make sure we're keeping a safe distance away from people. I realize not every job and every trade may have the ability to do all these things, but look at what you're doing in your work practices. Look at the best practice you can possibly do to mitigate those risks.
Thank you, Thomas. And I mean, I do think some specific examples that we've heard in the last few days of people are doing, like, so for traveling, for instance, that they're asking their employees to take separate vehicles. They are booking extra rooms. So, I mean, there's cost increases with that, but so long as the work can continue and people can do it safely, I think that that adds support. The other thing I've been hearing is that some sites are limiting the number of trades and certainly the number of people that are allowed on site at the same time. Certainly that has a consequence in terms of project schedule. But those companies and sites are making the determination that we'd rather have a delayed schedule than have a site shut down. And maybe we'll come back and talk in a few minutes with the Aon folks and with Misty and Craig about some of the business implications of making those decisions. But certainly everybody is prioritizing safety right now and trying to put in place solutions that can allow them and their employees to continue to work safely. Mindful of time, and I know Brita is going to have to jump off the call here fairly shortly because she has another commitment that she needs to make. I want to move on to this next question here quickly from you, Thomas, and then we'll allow any comments from Brita before she signs off. So, Thomas, one specific question we got from a participant was, they'd like a checklist that they can show owners so that they can verify that they've done everything in their power to mitigate risk. I'm sure that if you mentioned a handful of resources that SCSA is working on already, so I don't want to put you too much on the spot, but do you want to share a little bit about what may be coming up and how people can access those things?
Yeah, sure. So, so probably right now, and again, this is in response. So we've been working with all of our safety associations in construction across the country, actually, to sort of come up with some resources and share resources and knowledge. So we've been pooling all this together and developing, you know, what can we provide employers and construction workers in Saskatchewan that will give you the tools that you need to do this. So I hope shortly, in the next probably couple hours, we should have basically a document. It's basically construction site COVID prevention procedures. Sorry, I got a list here. Some enhanced cleaning procedures, employer protocols for the pandemic, safety notices for workers, a health questionnaire, signage around social distancing and hygiene that people can post. So we're going to, again, try to provide as many tools as we can, and always going to take suggestions. But right now, you know, probably at this point, again, practicing the basic safeguards you can and looking at a development plan. Some companies probably had a pandemic plan, but probably not to this extent. So the control mechanisms that they may put in place and control measures may not exactly address this. So they're going to have to look at those and modify. So we are providing some documents. I just got one on my desk here, which is actually like an exposure control plan for COVID-19, which will include basically how you can, the health hazards, what the responsibilities are of the employer, the supervisor, etc., risk assessment, risk control, and then basically some hygiene and hand washing techniques. So there'll be some more coming out here shortly.
Thanks, Thomas. And I can assure everybody that any information that the SCSA publishes or provides, and we're so grateful for them making the time and putting the energy into doing that, we will make all of that available as we can through our website portal, as I'm sure all other associations and groups will too. So you will be able to find that in a variety of different places. Brita,
we'll be sharing that with you.
Yeah, that's right. Thanks, Thomas. Brita, I'm going to come to you, ask for any last comments, because I do know you need to leave. And I want specifically for you to talk a little bit, if you can, about what companies can be doing with respect to communication when it comes to how they can make sure that their employees know what they have to do safety-wise and are doing that. So how can they communicate to really pass along the importance of following those best practices that are laid out by public health and by groups like the SCSA?
I think the short misses, we do have some clients that are making up posters. They don't have to be perfect, and I'm sure there's a lot online by now. The posters that are just really clear, not a lot of text on them, and a lot of them all over the place seem to be working. Just keep repeating the messages, that a lot of the control is in their hands. And I would just say, just stay connected and meet them where they are. And also know your people. A phone call to someone who's done something, you notice that they're really doing something great. You text them or privately message them and say, hey, I really notice what you're doing on site, or I know off site, hey, I know you're far away. I hear you're doing a great job and I just want to reach out to you personally and say thank you. So those sorts of things, reinforcing the message, but then also, you know, putting out continually. In communications, we say communicate 7 times, 7 ways. You can never over communicate, truly, and especially a time like this.
Thanks, Brita. Any other last comments? I know you have to go, so I'll let you have the floor here for a minute if you'd like.
Sure, just on that off-site piece, which I think Thomas covered really well, but from a communications point of view, if someone's working off-site, or I mean in a hotel and they're by themselves, one of the things I think you can do is maybe establish with them and encourage them to establish a network of coworkers they can connect with while they're away, because part of it is that isolation can be so hard for them to keep up their spirits and all sorts of things like that. So a phone call from you would probably be really great to say thanks for doing this, and is it okay that, you know, let them know, maybe can managers be reached after hours? So that's another way, another thing to do.
Okay, thanks, Brita, and thank you for making the time today to join us. I know you have to go, so thanks again.
Thank you all. It's been a pleasure, and what a great group and great questions, everyone. Have a good day. Stay safe.
Take care. Okay, let's go here maybe to Kyle right now. And then Kyle, I'd like you to give some advice to how people can look after themselves while they're so busy trying to take care of their business and their employees.
For sure. So a couple of things have gotten brought up already, but maybe give a few more specific kind of tips and recommendations that people can be doing to look after themselves right now. First and foremost, kind of focus on what is within your control. There are so many things going on out there that are going to be impacting us, right, that we really just don't have control over, which is scary. It's anxiety provoking, and it's tough. So at the end of the day, trying to put as much energy and time and effort into those things that we do have control over, right? Taking breaks from the news. It's really easy to get overwhelmed and just really caught up kind of in that cycle, that fear, that uncertainty, right? So taking some breaks from the news, taking breaks from social media, where this isn't just kind of at the forefront. I know it's difficult when we are practicing that isolation and the social distancing piece, but making sure we're taking care of our bodies. So eating healthy, trying to get physical activity wherever we can, even if that's, you know, just a little home workout, doing some yoga, push-ups, squats, whatever the case is, just in your home. Even if we are able to get outside and go for a walk and get some fresh air while still maintaining that appropriate distance, and, you know, abiding by all those hygiene recommendations and things like that, is still a great piece to take care of ourselves. I know with the whole social distancing thing, we want to maintain that physical distance, but still that social connection, right? When we are isolating, working from home, it's really easy to feel disconnected and lonely, all of which can have really negative impacts on our mental health. So still trying to maintain communication with loved ones and friends and family wherever possible, using the phone, video chat, you know, all of these different pieces of technology that we can still maintain that connection. And I find it's a lot more beneficial, a phone call or a video call, actually see somebody, hear their voice, as opposed to just texting or sending messages that way. Going along the lines of communication within our organizations, highlight the positives wherever possible, right? Highlight those wins, try and offer support and encouragement to our teams, and have that positive spin wherever possible. It is so easy. There's so much uncertainty. It's really easy to get sucked up into the negative and just keep highlighting those things that we already know. But, you know, finding those little wins and and providing, support and acknowledgement for other individuals when they are doing a great job is so important. Additionally, seeking out that extra help and support when you need it right now. So there's lots of different resources out there. I'd be more than happy to connect with individuals after this if you're looking for more specific answers or things like that. As well, Mark, I could send just a quick kind of resource page that you're welcome to share to the membership as well, just kind of with some tips, recommendations, and then when people do need that additional support, just some websites that people can check out, helplines, try and connect with counselors or professionals electronically. I know a number of individuals are offering teletherapy services or virtual therapy or counseling services. So those are some great resources to utilize at this time as well.
Perfect. Thank you, Kyle. We
Yep.
did have a specific question from one of the participants about mental health. So I'll just, I'm not going to identify the person, but I'll just read out the question. So right now I feel like I need some time to recover from my mental health. However, I can't stop working completely. I'm hoping I can continue to get the support I need from counselors and others that I've contacted through the mental health system. What's the best course of action for me to follow when I need to keep working, but also need to be taking care of myself? And I think you've touched on some of that, but if you can elaborate specifically to that, I'd appreciate it.
For sure. So if there are opportunities where you can kind of take a step back, maybe work in a bit of a modified, some modified duties, whether that's, working for 2 hours and then taking a break for an hour, whether that is just kind of cutting back on hours entirely. Maybe that's having some duties passed along to someone else at this time. At the end of the day, taking some time for your mental health is really important. And it's just like any other sick time or ill time. When you're not feeling well, you do need to take that time and recover for yourself, right? If you can't stop that work completely, just trying to maybe take a step back and really put some more time and effort into maintaining your own mental health. I'm hoping that you are able to connect with some professionals and get the support that you do need right now. But again, kind of like I touched on earlier, I'd be more than happy to connect with people directly after this if you are looking for specific support that I can maybe help point you in the right direction about. And just finally, kind of maintaining that ongoing communication with your, place of work, whether that's the HR team and, supervisor, manager, if you do need to kind of take that time for yourself and making sure to highlight and take care of your mental health accordingly.
Thank you, Kyle. And yeah, if any resources that you can share, we of course will distribute that. And
for sure.
Thank you very much for that.
Yep, definitely.
Okay, we've got about 15 minutes left. I want to move to engage the rest of our task force members who have been waiting patiently. So thank you very much to Craig, Mike, John, and Misty. Craig, I'm going to come to you with this first question. This is, again, comes from the participants. What advice should we be giving to our employees and their families in terms of how they can manage their budgets during a time like this?
That's a great question, Mark, and I'm glad people asked that. In fact, this is what I'm going to talk about is exactly what we're doing in my own household. And I think this is a time for common sense. First thing I recommend is that we suggest to our staff that they develop a household budget and determine what expenses can be deferred and, quite frankly, what cannot even be made at this time. I mean, there's certainly limitations on what you can spend money on these days. And I think people being aware of what their monthly costs are, what has to be done and what they could be optional, I think is a smart thing to be done. I think secondly, it's helpful to run different scenarios on income levels. So if an individual was to receive 10, 25, 50% less income just because of the amount of work they were getting or whatnot, how might that affect the family household? Being aware and being prepared, I think, is very very smart. So I think encouraging our staff to do that would be great. The second thing would be to anticipate what home expenses could be deferred potentially, whether It's through programs that might be forthcoming around mortgage deferrals or utility bills, for example. For a lot of our households, if there's a deferral on mortgages or utility bills, that will have a very material effect on the expense levels of households and for our employees. So those could provide flexibility to us as employers as far as adjusting incomes without having a dramatic impact on our employees. But those details, I think, will be forthcoming in coming days and weeks.
Thank you, Craig. Next question shifts us a little bit more to the business side of things. And again, we'll start with you, Craig. Cash flow is already a challenge for a lot of companies and is likely to become more of a challenge, especially if work starts to dry up. What options should companies be considering for shoring up their financial position right now?
Yeah, so it's very similar actually to the last question from a household perspective, right? I think you just want to be smart and be practical. As I mentioned in the opening, cash is always king in business, and I think probably no time more important than right now. I think that, you know, again, these are the same things I'm doing in my own business as well too, that I think are smart things to consider. Number one, develop a cash flow projection based upon the existing work that you have. And I would update that as frequently as possible, at minimum each week, where you're developing a cash flow projection so you know what dollars you have coming in the door. Second, invoice more often, depending upon what your contracts say, but as frequently as you can invoice and get invoices out into your customers' hands, the greater chance you have of getting paid. So if you can invoice weekly, that would be great. Also have conversations with your customers about whether or not there's anything looming on the horizon around budget challenges on their end that may have implications as far as payment to you. The sooner you have a heads up, I think that would be great. The second thing is third thing, in addition to invoicing more often, would be when you're looking at your cash flow projections and stuff, I would, on a project by project basis, look at the level of risk of payment and the timing of payment, and prescribe a probability rating. Is it high, medium, or low, or, you know, a percentage rating or something like that of how risky you think it is as far as getting payment out of a particular client, or whether or not the timing could be affected. And this could depend upon the nature of what sector the client is in, as well as their overall financial health as well. Fourth, I would start talking to your banker as soon as possible, or those that provide you your credit facilities. Trust is always the most important foundation in those relationships. So the more conversation you're having with your banker, the better. And I think is more as well too, the worst thing you can do right now is hide from your banker and put your head in the sand. I think if you can start developing a credit servicing plan on your end tied to your cash flow, so you can demonstrate the fact that you have cash flow, you have liquidity, you can service your debt. The more ownership you're demonstrating to your banker, the more proactive you are, the better. And if you can present to them a plan that shows that that based upon your burn rate on cash or liquidity, that you may need support, and at what point you may need support, and how the proactive measures you're taking to manage cash flow, gain that trust, I think will be incredibly valuable in being able to access credit as needed. The final thing just on the radar screen, and I know the SCA will be an important resource around sharing information on liquidity support programs from governments, whether that's grants or loans that are available to business. And I'll put in a little plug for Mark and his team there. You have a great association. For those of you that are members and on the line, your association, for what I'm seeing in the province, is being a leader as far as the quality of information, the depth of information that is being provided to you as members. So kudos to the SCA team for that.
Thank you, Craig. Okay, so I want to, we've got time for two more questions, but we're not done on answering this question yet. I don't think all that advice was stellar. So I'd like to turn first to Michael. Michael, do you have anything you want to add to what we heard from Craig with respect to cash flow and managing that?
Yeah, Craig outlined it perfectly. Just a few things. I agree with Craig 100%. You know, you have to reach out to your lenders, your banks, if you haven't done so already. It doesn't matter if you're large or small, if your balance sheet is strong or it's not. You need to reach out to them, because the next few months, your revenue income will not be the same as what you're used to. So your payments to your vendors is not going to be the same. Wherever you can take an advantage of deferring to an interest-only payment, or increasing your operating lines. The sooner you do that, the better. Credit will be a lot easier today, securing today, than it is going to be 30, 60, 90 days from now.
Thanks, Michael. John, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, you guys, and thanks, Mike, for that. Great comments and a great program so far. The only thing that I would add to Mike's there, and he was going to get to it, was when we talk about a credit facility and maintaining trust with your providers. Think of your surety company in that same vein as your bank. You want to make sure that you're keeping them apprised of what you're doing. Probably increase the communication to them through your broker, and just to let them know what's going on, if there's any considerations around your line of credit or your banking arrangements. Really stay in touch with your surety providers, because they are essentially extending credit through bonds to your jobs and your ongoing operations. And so that would just be another piece in the situation here, and great comments on trust being kind of number one for sure, along with cash and cash flow. But surety companies run on a trust relationship to a large degree, as well as what your financial picture is. So just bear that in mind and keep those communication channels open.
Thanks, John. Misty, anything that you would like to add to that? Go ahead.
No, I sorry, just unmuted there, Mark. No, I don't have anything to add on that point. I think those guys have that one covered.
Okay, then Misty, I'm going to come to you for this next question then. You highlighted a few of these things in your opening remarks, but can you give, from a contract perspective, a bit of an overview of what items contractors should be paying particularly close attention to right now, and what, if anything, they should be doing differently to protect themselves?
Absolutely. So as I alluded to at the start, the first issue that we're seeing a lot of right now is delays or anticipated delays because of the COVID crisis. So a lot of contractors are looking to, you should be looking to your contracts right now to determine if you have a clause that permits delay under certain circumstances. You will hear the term force majeure used a lot, and that is how they're drafted into some of the contracts. But sometimes they're just encompassed within just a clause that says delay. For example, the CCDC 2 just addresses delay in a delay clause. You won't find the term force majeure in there. But the bottom line is, make sure you're looking at your contracts to find out, do I have one, and what does it permit me to do? So in some circumstances, it will give very specific requirements for delay. You know, if you have a delay, it'll only be permitted under these circumstances. So some contracts are drafted that it has it very specific. Other contracts will have a more wide open type of interpretation. I haven't seen many that actually anticipate a pandemic related delay. So, you know, to be honest, I think case law wise, we're flying a little bit in the dark right now. So a lot of the contracts will have something to the effect of any cause beyond the contractor's control other than one that you've caused yourself. It's still up in the air at the moment whether the COVID crisis will fit within some of those more wide open terms. But the point is to make sure you're looking at your contract and finding out, what does it say and what does it permit me to do? Some will also permit additional costs in those circumstances. Some will only permit an extension of the completion date. So step number one is to find out, what do you have? And that applies not only to contracts, but think about it in both parts of the chain. If you're a general contractor, you need to know what's going on at the level with the owner, but you also need to know what your rights and obligations are vis-a-vis all of your sub-trades. So what do your subcontracts say? Subcontractors, similarly, you will often have a contract that adopts the terms of the prime contract. So you need to know not only what's in your own subcontract, but also what is in the prime. So the first is a bit of a review of all the contracts for projects where you anticipate potential delays, or maybe you're experiencing delays. The second part of that is, how do you exercise those? What do you need to do to preserve your rights if you do have the right to delay in certain circumstances, or the right to additional costs? And the key here is notice. Often there will be notice requirements. So you need to give the owner notice, or you need to give the general contractor notice of the delay within blank number of days after the delay occurs. Now, a big question right now is, what if I haven't experienced any delays, but given all of the shutdowns occurring, I expect I might? My advice so far has been serve a notice of delay, and in it explicitly flag some of the things you anticipate seeing. And then second, to be even more safe, once you do experience those delays, give another notice. You will never, it's never a bad idea to give too many notices. And because you have those strict timelines, we don't really know when your first notification of the delay will be. So my suggestion now, if you think you're going to be impacted, give a notice of that delay now, but then also follow up once the actual delays start occurring. When you are serving those notices, do check how you properly serve. Every contract has an address or an email and a method of properly serving a notice. Sending a text might not suffice. You have to know how you properly serve a notice under your contracts. And the last part about this is, how do I exercise it? You can give notice, but you're going to have to prove it at some point. So you need to have evidence, and start immediately. Start immediately tracking any types of notices that any types of delay that you're experiencing, whether that's labor shortages, whether that's materials that are in short supply at the moment. Anything that you have experienced as far as a delay, you should be tracking that specifically. And I suggest doing on an entirely separate spreadsheet or something to that effect that is COVID only related delays. The third aspect of that is mitigation. So you have an obligation to mitigate any of the impacts that you're experiencing for delay or cost increases, anything of that nature. So I would suggest in your sheet, make sure you're flagging what is the delay issue. Were you short staffed that day? Were you short workers? Did you have to lay off workers? Did you have trouble accessing supplies? And then put what you are doing to mitigate those risks. And so mitigation could be anything from pre-ordering supplies that you need down the road, but maybe in short supply. It could be reordering trades or something to that effect. But whatever, you need to do those mitigation steps in order to effectively be able to claim any type of delay or costs down the road. The second part of this is the project shutdowns. So on the flip side, maybe you are getting notices now that your projects are being shut down because the owner is wanting to shut down the work site and not take any further risk. And I have seen this sometimes on any of the First Nation projects. Often they are being shut down because obviously the bands are very concerned about the COVID crisis. So in that case, check your contracts for when the owner has the right to suspend or terminate the project, and make sure that that they are doing exactly what they're entitled to do. If they are not, you may have to give a notice of dispute. So be sure that you're exercising your right to dispute that decision if you think that they're stretching beyond what they're contractually able to do. So that's a big piece there. And finally, just one step, when it comes to day-to-day project management, try to think outside the box a little bit. Even if you're carrying on relatively, again, with the social distancing, it's going to be a challenge, but even if your projects are able to continue and you've taken some steps to mitigate, try to foresee other issues that could delay things like payment. So for example, are payment certifiers actually attending site? Or is there going to be a delay in getting them there to get your project certified so you can get paid? Communication is going to be really key on that right now, so make sure you know what's happening. Same thing with inspections. If you need inspections done, try to find out now whether the city or municipalities are sending out inspectors, because that could be another aspect of delay. So, again, part of it is trying to foresee some of the delays that may occur for you to get paid. And I encourage you to take those steps before it happens, just so that you're not struggling down the road.
Thanks, Misty. In a second, I'm going to ask John to provide any additional thoughts on that. Just before we do that, I acknowledge we're a little past time. We're going to take a couple more points from our experts on this question, and I'm going to ask one more question and then we're going to shut it down. But one thing I would ask for participants who are still here is, and I see most of you are, in Zoom you have an ability to raise your hand. And if you found this to be useful and would be interested in more of these in the future, probably more topic specific though, so rather than having everybody, we might have one expert or two experts dealing with one or two issues. Please raise your hand so that we can get a sense of whether this was useful. Thank you. I see some of you doing that already. Okay, John, let's come to you in terms of anything you would like to add from the risk or contract perspective that contractors need to be paying close attention to right now.
Yes, thanks, Mark. Yes, I would like to just add to Misty's comments in and around contract review. A couple of things is, don't forget that your insurance policy is a contract. And so do the reviews, or have your broker do the review for any coverage that might be available. And I'm going to say that it is extremely scarce that you would have coverage under an insurance policy of general insurance. Reason being is that they're hazard risk policies, typically triggered by an event such as a fire, flood, windstorm, theft, or vandalism. And in this case, with the pandemic being a virus, it's extremely unlikely that insurers are going to consider that as a trigger for coverage. But have a look at your insurance policy through your broker. There's the odd one, and I say it's very rare that there might be a specific clause related to extra expenses associated with communicable diseases, or in fact, a business interruption associated with communicable diseases. Not very common, but something could be in there, but I don't want to get people's hopes up. It would be rare. The other part of the the insurance policy contract in the review is what are the conditions of coverage? And Misty mentioned here the fact that some of these projects could be canceled or terminated and put on hold midterm. And so in particular, look at the conditions of coverage so that that can be maintained to the extent possible. Most builders risk policies have a termination clause that might give 30 days of no activity on the site, and then after that the policy is considered to be not in effect anymore. In fact, it's terminated. So those are some review items along with your construction contract review. Have your broker review your insurance policy contract for coverage and conditions.
Thanks, John. Michael, anything you'd like to add to that?
No, that's good, John. Just to Misty's point of, following notice of delays, it's always good to communicate with everybody on the project. That's owners, general contractors, subs, and suppliers. Understand if there are going to be any disruptions to the schedule, and then that can help you with your notice in writing of delay.
Thanks, Michael. Craig, any last comments on that question? No. Okay. So we're going to move. I want to say we're going to move to our last question. Before we do that, I do want to acknowledge there was a handful, I think 4 or 5 questions that we received ahead of time that we haven't gotten to yet because we have been moving through these topically. We won't get to those during this call, but you will get responses back from me and from the panelists to whom they were relevant. And any questions that were asked today during the call that weren't answered, although I think we got to most of them, will also be answered in the next day or so. So please stay tuned for your answers. I think the last question that we will ask here is actually something that came up during the discussion. So I think maybe I'll start with you, Craig, on this one. Is contractors are in a tough spot like everybody. How can we be expected to submit lump sum pricing for tenders with all of the uncertainty going on right now with, labor supply chain disruptions, and the like? And so the question is, how do we even begin to price what our work is going to be when the circumstances are changing on a daily basis?
That's a great question. And it's going to be something we're going to be struggling with in our business in the weeks ahead and stuff. I think my best answer at this point would be able to say, like, I think in any pricing that's provided, you need to lay out some of those contingencies and risks that are provided, and that the pricing is based upon the contingency that It's based upon these assumptions. Be very clear in what your assumptions are, and that in their recognition of the dynamic environment that we're in, as things evolve and change, there may need to be open conversations and discussions about the terms of the contract, and just make that very clear. And I appreciate that that from a bidding standpoint, you know, that's kind of the first step in, and then that would have to be negotiated into the contract later. I would hope that, especially public entities, but I would hope that most that are running procurement processes right now would be practical and pragmatic. But I think that's maybe even to a question that you can ask when the tender has been released, is ask a question: to what degree have considerations been provided or thought about in terms of adjustments to terms and conditions based upon the environment that we're in, and maybe even provide some examples.
Perfect. Thank you, Craig. Michael.
I have a question more than a comment to Misty. If we have, to this question, if contractors are bidding going forward, are these delays now a known condition? And do force majeure or notice of delays, are they even applicable going forward, or how are those treated?
Yeah, great question. Again, it's always very, very dependent on what the wording of the contract is. So I would suggest, if you are bidding on a project, I mean, usually they have the terms of the contract attached that they will expect them to sign. Take a look at what it says. It's going to be very, very fact dependent on how it is worded. I would think at this point, anything you bid on going forward, I definitely think this would be something you would have to account for. So if you were submitting a price right now, I think it is fair to assume that you know that the COVID crisis is occurring and you are factoring that into your price. Because to later say it is something completely beyond the contractor's control, you know, is going to be a tougher sell than anything ahead of time. But again, it really does depend on the terms that are being proposed to you. If in fact the contract term says, you know, it's something that you couldn't anticipate. I mean, it's possible that you could have a COVID related delay in a form that you actually couldn't anticipate. You know, if there's a supply of something that is not, you know, in short supply right now, but becomes one unexpectedly down the road, then I think that would be fair. So again, very, very fact specific, but really look at those contracts and know what you're bidding on.
Thanks, Misty. Michael, anything you wanted to add to that, or was that just a question? No?
That's great. Thank you very much, Misty.
John, anything? Last word goes, actually, Will, yeah, second last word goes to you.
Okay, thanks again. Thanks again, Mark. Yeah, one thing that we didn't get a chance to touch on too much today, although people are probably becoming aware of it, is bid security delivery. That is bid bonds in particular, and consent of surety. That's one of the last bastions of a hard copy. Traditionally, people wanted a document in their hands that was paper and it had a wet seal on it. That all changed very quickly because of the difficulties of delivering that type of document physically. So I would just encourage contractors as well as consultants and owners to accept alternate forms of the bid security. And what we're talking about here in particular is electronic versions of the bond. There is one that is a formal e-bond with embedded signatures that would probably be the preference, but in these times, even a scanned document should be given consideration. We've seen some owners still insisting upon a hard copy, but I think that's, you know, really in these times now, day by day is just going to be diminished to the opportunity to deliver that at all. So that's just my point here, is that owners, contractors, consultants check with the bid security requirements and encourage people to accept an e-bond or a scanned version in the times that we're in right now.
Thanks, John. Misty, I think I wanted to give the last word to you if you have anything you want to add to that question about how we bid in uncertain times.
No, I don't have anything else to add to that. I think, you know, again, it is lump sum bids are going to be a real challenge right now. One suggestion, although I don't know how far it will go, but you know, if you know owners that are looking to tender out, you may want to talk to them in advance about changing the request for price. So whether that is changing to cost plus or something that is more manageable, you can certainly have those conversations now, and hopefully they take that into account. But otherwise, if the bid goes out and is request for lump sum, you know, again, it's a little riskier now to bid and to know what to bid than it has been before. I wish I had a magic you know, answer for that, but unfortunately we don't. So just read the terms of the contract you will be expected to enter, because that is going to be very, very important to know going forward.
Perfect. Thank you, Misty. Okay, well, thank you, everyone. First of all, thank you to our panelists, Misty, Candice, Rodelle, Kyle, Brita, Mike, John, Thomas, and Craig, for making the time to be here, for being patient and timely in your answers. Thank you. Thank you to all of our participants. A reminder that this has been recorded, and so will be available online for you to view or for others to view. If you do have questions that weren't answered, they will be answered. If you have questions that you didn't send in that you'd like answered, you can do that as well. And certainly if you have any feedback on this or any questions you'd like to add, please email me directly at president@scaonline.ca. And stay tuned to our website, where we will be adding resources from all of our experts, their organizations, and others. Stay safe, stay well, and we will be in touch again soon. So thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.